Hello, I'm Andres E. Menegaudos, and I'm the moderator for the second presidential debate. In order, I would like to introduce our candidates from the first presidential debate. Mr. Noah Golden,
Hello, everyone.
Mr. Max S. Warner,
Hello, everybody.
and Mr. Lucas Greifzu.
Hello.
I almost screwed up there. So now let's us say the rules of this debate. So each candidate will have 90 seconds to speak on each question, and after each question is finished, each candidate will be able to respond to anything another candidate has said for 60 seconds. Afterwards, when the topic is done, every single candidate will be able to initiate an open debate. Is that clear?
Yes.
All right. Let's move on to our opening statements, starting with Mr. Noah.
Well, everyone, as I started this off last time, I would like to say it is an absolutely great honor to be here tonight with my fellow candidates and, of course, the great moderator that we have here. I'd like to start off tonight by saying that I love this country and I love everyone in this country, and I absolutely want the absolute best for the United States of America. And each and every single one of my policies is towards making the United States a more better union and making sure that everyone has equal opportunity to participate in our capitalism and really be a successful human being according to their own definition of that. And ladies and gentlemen, as you will see in this debate tonight, I am all about respect, and and I'm sure all the other two candidates are, of course, about respect. So let's all be Americans here, and let's all watch this debate, and let's have the greatest country in the world after this, and make sure that once all is said and done and all the debates are done, you make sure to vote.
Is that all?
Yep.
All right. Thank you. I would now like to ask Mr. Max to say his opening statement.
Very well. Good morning, my fellow, or not good morning, pardon me for that. Good evening, or good whatever time you're watching this, my fellow Americans. As you all know, or as you should all know, my name is Max S. Warner, and I am running for President of the United States. Now, as I said in my closing statement yesterday, I am running because I believe that we can form a more perfect union, a more equitable union, a more social union, and a true republic. And I believe that we can make a better America under a Warner Saludar administration. I believe that the policies that I espouse here today are the greatest for this country. And I recognize that Mr. Greifzu and Mr. Golden are not my enemies, but rather simply people who I may or may not disagree with on this stage. And therefore, I say I am ready to bring America in a new direction, along with my Vice President Hans Saludar, who you will hear from tomorrow. And I am very proud to even be on the stage tonight. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And for the record, can we not just say I am done at the end of everything?
Yes, I will. Yes.
I agree with that.
That works.
Thank you.
Okay.
Just say thank you after everyone stops.
All right. That works. I would now like to ask Mr. Lucas up to say his opening statement.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I just want to start by saying what an honor and privilege it is to be here tonight to debate both of these other presidential candidates that are on the stage with me tonight. We as a country are divided, and we have been for at least the past 4 years under President Donald Trump. And we need to focus on issues that are going to bring this country together and not the issues that are going to divide us even further. We need to bring education back up to a level in this country where it can compete with other nations. We need to protect our borders so that so that the citizens of America can be safe while they live in their homes and in their communities. And we also need to use our global, I'm trying to think of the word. We need to use our ability as a global superpower to help aid conflicts around the world so the world can become a safer place altogether.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas. And I think that Mr. is a little bit too formal. I'll just be referring to you as your first names from now on. So with that said, let's move on to our first topic. And our first topic we will be covering today will be something that is quite, I guess, diverse or something. Let us talk about climate change first. And our first question is, how do you plan to combat climate change? And I would like to ask Lucas up first. I almost said the word. Damn.
Climate change is a problem in this country that has been ignored for the last 4 years. President Donald Trump has ignored climate change and ignored the dangers that it poses, while also lying about whether it's even true or not, whether it even exists. We need to start addressing the problem with our climate right now before it's too late to make any impactful changes. Climate change could very well end life on this planet as we know it, unless we correct decades of mistakes that have been made and that have plagued our world. We have roughly 4.5% of the world's population, and yet we are responsible for about 13.5% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. And this is something that desperately needs to change in this country if we're going to move forward to a greener environment for our country as a whole and try and correct some of these changes so that our planet can continue to survive long after we are gone.
Thank you, Lucas. I would now like to ask Max to speak.
Well, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Certainly, I believe climate change is one of the most important issues our country faces today. We must recognize that climate change is an existential threat to the American people as well as all peoples of the world. Now, we can fix it, at least partially. We can try to undo plenty of the damage already done. We cannot entirely prevent climate change, but we can certainly hold it back. And how do we do this? We transition to clean and green energy as much as we can. We have to work and strive towards the building of a brand new, economically independent United States that doesn't use oil and gas and all these really bad polluting fuels, essentially. And I believe that we can tackle climate change, especially by rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement, which Donald Trump had the United States lead. Now, I think that we work better with other nations as a global community instead of being on our own. And I think climate change can only be solved with full cooperation like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Max. Noah, I would now like to ask you to speak.
Me and my running mate Anish Sikkanam care very much about this issue of climate change just because of how much it has been ignored. We are not going to point fingers at anyone for this because let's be honest here. I believe most people have had a part to play in this, whether we were slow to start at this or whether we were quick at it. Whatever the case may be, we're all really beginning to acknowledge that climate change exists now, and this is a very good start. The way that we can combat this is by knowing that we need to phase out fossil fuels. And when I say phase out fossil fuels, I don't mean an immediate snap change. I mean a change over time. That is the way that we can really begin to get this going here. And we change to new renewable energy sources. And what I like and what Anish also likes is nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is actually very clean and very good for the environment. And it uses more energy for only a little bit amount of the source that it uses, either uranium or thorium. So there are very good options out there to help stop the emissions of greenhouse gases. And Anish and I look to put into place those policies which allow for us to move forward and stop all the pollution in the air. And another part of that is making sure that we look at China and we hold them accountable for the amount of pollution that they've caused, along as other countries in the world.
Thank you, Noah. So now each candidate will have a chance to comment on anything another candidate has said. Would any of you like to say anything?
May I
Yes,
begin?
I would.
Oh.
Max, you can begin though.
Thank
All
you,
right, go
Lucas.
ahead.
I do appreciate that. First, I would like to comment on Noah's stance that we should hold China accountable. It is true that China makes up a significant portion of CO2 emitted into the environment, but we should also take a look at other countries, specifically India, with a population of over 1 billion people as well. Not to mention the fact that we should immediately focus on our own country, because after all, our own country, what happens here ultimately affects the rest of the world. And so I have a question for you, Noah, which is, do you believe that, American fossil fuel policy will greatly affect what's going on abroad?
There's perhaps a chance of it, but it won't change immediately, which is why we should put pressure on these other countries. I named China just because they're a very good example to give. But of course, I'm going to look at all countries and make sure that we look at what they're doing. Yes, of course, if we take that stance forward, there is definitely a good chance that it will cause some dominoes to fall. But, there's a lot of other countries making that change too. But if we can help make that change faster, we absolutely will.
All right. Thank you. Lucas, you wanted to speak?
Yes, I did. I want to start by addressing what Max just said about how America is actually America is the largest net producer of carbon emissions. What I mean by that is that per person in the United States, we do emit the most carbon emissions. So we definitely need to start here in our own country and after we do that, we can branch out to other countries such as China, which do, of course, obviously have a lot of carbon emissions. But I also want to address Noah about his opinions on nuclear energy, because while nuclear energy is a very clean source of energy, it's also dangerous. It's dangerous to try and use nuclear reactors to try and solve the energy problem in this country, given the fact that they're not very efficient. Nuclear energy can't travel very far away from the power plant itself without losing a lot of the energy that's produced during the process in the reactor. And also, while meltdowns might not happen very often, when they do happen, they're very costly in terms of both money and lives. So that's something that we need to take into account when we talk about clean energy.
I would like to address that because out of all energy sources, starting first with the lives and meltdowns, out of all energy sources, it actually has been shown statistically to have the least amount of errors, and actually it's cut. And out of all incidences that we've seen with all nuclear reactors in the world, it has taken the least amount of lives out of all energy sources, based on malfunctions. Yes, that does include Chernobyl and all kind of whatever reactor meltdowns you would like to think about. And while it is true that nuclear energy does not go too far from its source, that's why we should build more nuclear reactors. And I don't say we should only build nuclear reactors. I say we should do both a combination of renewable energy sources and nuclear energy sources, because a combination of both is really how we can move forward and really produce the most clean energy. And let's keep in mind that nuclear energy is in fact pretty efficient, as it does produce lots of energy. While it may lose energy over time while it travels, that's why if we build more of these nuclear energy power plants, then it really helps. So that's what we can do.
Thank you, Noah. Okay, so now our next question on the topic. Should use of fossil fuels be regulated by the government? And I would like to ask Max to speak first.
Well, thank you, Mr. Moderator. And I think my answer, well, I don't think my answer to this is pretty firm, and that is a resounding yes. I do believe that fossil fuels should be very heavily regulated. Now, not in a way that would cripple the industry, but in a way that would certainly try and prevent carbon emissions as much as possible. Now, first of all, we have to start by making sure that cars produced in the United States from the year 2040 and onwards are no longer gas cars or diesel cars. Instead, they should be electric cars or even battery cars like Tesla's. And the way I see it, we can utilize Tesla and other private companies to build an entire force of electric cars or other cars that are not the fossil fuel consumers. And I believe that we as a country can transition away from fossil fuels by the year 2050. And this whole process, I said it would take until 2040 to ensure that all cars released would no longer be fossil fuel consuming. And that is because, yes, it would take time, would take money, would take costs, and you couldn't get it done in 4 years. But we would certainly set the groundwork under a Warner Saludar administration. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. I would like to now ask Lucas to speak.
I don't believe that we need to regulate the amount of, well, first of all, I should say I don't believe that we can regulate the amount of fossil fuels used in this country right now anyway, because America is simply not ready to make that transition. There is not enough sources of green energy, solar or wind, even nuclear is an example. There's not enough sources of that to currently replace fossil fuels in this country. And in terms of what Max was saying about electric cars and using Teslas and that kind of thing, Teslas are very expensive for a reason. They cost significantly more to make due to the lack of fossil fuels, and also the chargers that you have to build as well to be able to charge these cars are also very expensive. And so while I don't agree that fossil fuels are in the best long-term interest of this country, I do believe that we need to take some time to build up the infrastructure that we have for clean energy before we make any sort of transition into a more clean society.
Thank you, Lucas. And I would like to finally ask Noah to speak.
So as you already know from my last answer, Anish and I have a plan to phase out fossil fuels over time as we do plan to build on the infrastructure. And I'd like to think of this almost like a manual transmission car, if you can think of it that way. When you're using a manual transmission car, as you let off the clutch, you can press down on the gas, and you could do so in balance. And if you can do that, then you get the car going. And now, if we can really get this ball rolling with that balance, then we can really do well as a country. With regulating fossil fuels, it's something that we at first definitely need to take lightly. And the way that we start with that is by beginning to build these new sources of energy. That being nuclear and renewable sources. And once we begin with that, then we can begin to let off the clutch, as in letting off these fossil fuels. And as long as we can do that over time, to make sure that we don't destroy the industry, and we have the ability to replace the energy that we are currently taking away, as in the fossil fuels, then we will be in a great spot in the world. We'll be in a much better place in the future.
All right. Thank you, Noah. So now the topic is finished, and there will be allowed 2 minutes for you all to openly debate. Would you like to utilize that time? Or would you like to move
Yeah,
on?
I'd like to say something quickly.
Go ahead. 2 minutes
I
starts
don't.
now.
I'm listening to Noah and Anisha's plan just now. I disagree with it slightly. What I think we need is a clear two-step plan. Instead of making it more of a transition where we start to do both at the same time, we need to solely focus on building more solar and wind farms, and I exclude nuclear because I don't believe that nuclear power is a sustainable source of energy for this country. There are millions of acres of barren desert land in the west and midwest of this country, and we could very easily utilize all those acres of land to build solar and wind farms that would help power homes and communities all across the country. And then once we do that, we can then transition into eliminating fossil fuels by reducing our reliance on foreign oil from places like Canada and Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Middle East.
With phasing out at the same time as building, it allows us to make sure that the industry doesn't get destroyed, and we make sure that we don't unemploy so many Americans at once. If we do one immediately, then we're going to take out a lot of American jobs, and there's no saying that they're going to want to go into that. Someone who has a job in fossil fuels wouldn't immediately jump over to working with renewable energy, which is why if we do this phased out, we can really balance everything at the same time. A plan would just unemploy people, and that would just lead to another problem. Nuclear energy does have a place, and there's actually a few countries that I can mention. A lot of Great Britain actually uses renewable energy sources, but it takes up so much land. There's so much land that it takes up, which is why I also believe that nuclear energy, we can work at the same time. I have nothing against renewable energy, but nuclear energy really doesn't take up that much land and still gives off lots of energy. And let's look at two countries comparatively that are working in two different routes. Germany is moving more and more towards renewable energy sources, while France is actually working more towards nuclear. In France, they're actually getting more energy for less money. In France, Germany is actually now taking up a lot of land, and they're paying more for their energy in Germany.
I'd like to comment on that though quickly, because countries like the UK and France are vastly smaller than the United States, so the amount of energy that is lost over the space that nuclear energy would have to travel isn't as much of a concern there, because there's not as much of a space gap to cover. And when you mention renewable energy, yes, it does cost more money, but it's also more effective. There's virtually little to no energy lost in transition, and is able to travel across the country in examples such as solar and wind, which you can transport across the country and use anywhere in the country while only taking up the land that isn't used anyway.
The problem with focusing solely hold on. The problem with solely looking at renewable energy is that it only produces it produces some energy 75% of the time. 25% of the time, there's no energy being produced, and it's reliant on the environment, and that is and that can lead to it being unreliable and can put people out of energy. In the case of a streak of stormy days, or a streak of windless days, it can really help if we balance it out with renewable energy and nuclear energy. Then we're really helping get that good balance in there so that there is reliable energy.
Here's the other thing, though, is that, hold on, just quickly, things such as solar and wind energy, you don't necessarily always need the sun to be shining for them to work, because they store the energy and keep it for when it's not sunny. And that's much less of a problem in places like Utah and Arizona, where these solar farms would be built anyway, because it's sunny 90% of the time in those places anyway.
That doesn't mean that it would work everywhere, though. That's why if we build nuclear, in contrast to that, in places where it's not exactly favorable for renewable energy, then it can really work out well for us.
That's what I'm saying, though, is you build the farms in Utah and Arizona, and the energy can be shipped across the country. It doesn't lose energy over distance like nuclear does.
Wait, before you say anything, one, we have another topic based on energy, and two, I would just like to say that we've been going like overtime on this discussion, and I'm trying to think that 2 minutes might be a little bit too little for the amount of discussing you guys want to do. So I'll make a deal: 4 minutes to discuss. Well, if you want to, sound good?
Sure, why not?
That's fine. You can also feel free to cut us off if we're going over.
Yeah, like you cut me off like twice that entire thing. Anyways, let's move on to the second topic. And the second topic we're going to be covering is the Supreme Court. And the first question I'd like to pose to you all is, should Supreme Court justices serve for life? If not, what is the alternative? And I would first like to ask Noah to speak.
I believe that Supreme Court justices can serve for life if they so choose to. And if one chooses to resign, that is just fine. Though there is merit to the argument that we should put terms to being Supreme Court justices, I don't think that's entirely the best option, because then we would basically need elections to decide Supreme Court justices, and that would just add another layer of chaos that we can't exactly deal with at this current moment in time. And I think the system that we have right now actually works. And and I don't know if this is the next question, but I'd still want to put this out there. Do not stack the court. Stacking the court is an awful idea.
Thank you, Noah. I would like to ask now ask Max to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. As I'm sure you know, I believe that absolutely there should be term limits for Supreme Court justices. The current system that we have means that people can be in the Supreme Court for decades on end until they croak, which honestly is not the best idea. You don't really want to be making policy all the way up until your death. Also, it shouldn't be this complex a process. The way that I see it, we should stick to 15-year term limits for justices. Then the president can appoint a new justice, Senate confirms them, and this time it should also go through the House. I believe that both houses of Congress should have a say, considering that the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett was very rushed last month. And honestly, we can do better as a nation in ensuring that our policies are not completely reliant on the opinions of Supreme Court justices based on their biases. So yes, I do believe in term limits, and thank you.
Thank you, Max. Lucas, I would like to ask you to speak now.
Supreme Court judges should not have term limits, and this topic shouldn't even be discussed in any serious level of government. The whole point of the Supreme Court, if you really look at and study the Constitution, is that it be independent of both other branches of government in the matter that they don't have to be reelected. The Supreme Court was designed to be politically independent, which I understand that some people might think that the policy makes the person, but there's the person, struggling on my words here, that the policy makes the person. It's the other way around. The person makes the policy. Just because a Republican president appointed a judge does not mean they're always going to vote in a Republican fashion. Now, to address what Max said, I wanted to quickly clear up a misconception. The Supreme Court doesn't make policy. They simply uphold the Constitution. And they just interpret it the way that they believe that it is. And this has been the way that the Supreme Court has been throughout existence. And now the court might lean towards a more conservative base, but that certainly hasn't been the case throughout the entire court's history. And the second problem with term limits is that if you were to have term limits, one president would put all of the judges on the court once the term limits run up. So you'd really have to try and think about whether that's a good idea or not for yourself.
Another response that I would also like to give to Max is this: if we put term limits, there's a good chance that we could have so a president. Let's just say that could lead to the opportunity for multiple Supreme Court justices to have their term limit end at the same time. If 3 term limits end at the same time, then that would mean that the president can now put up 3 new justices according to their liking. Now, yes, it is, of course, the Supreme Court justices very much usually tend to be bipartisan, but there is a chance that they're not. And in that chance, if there's term limits and multiple get put in at the same time to the same party, it could cause the same problem that I have with stacking the courts. And that's just too many being put in at the same party at once.
Thank you, Noah. I know you responded, but I would now like to ask that if any candidates would like to respond to anything another candidate has said.
I would like to respond, I guess, to both Noah and Lucas because they made really, really similar points, if I may, Mr. Moderator.
All right, go ahead.
I would like to say that, first of all, yes, to answer Lucas's question, or not question, but fact, really, the Supreme Court was never meant to be political. It was meant to be apolitical and simply uphold the constitutionality of laws and policy. But the point is, in the year 2020, the Supreme Court has become very political over time. Many of the situations or policies that have been discussed in it have been very politically influenced. For example, we have the example of DC versus Heller, which Lucas brought up yesterday. That case was, of course, overturned, but we have to remember that Scalia was on the case, and even though it was turned out to be unconstitutional, he interpreted it as a complete infringement on the Second Amendment, while the others also, thought sort of somewhere in the middle. The point that I'm trying to make is that the Supreme Court should strive to be completely apolitical. And going back to what Noah said, I don't want to stack the courts. I think stacking the courts is a really bad idea. Not to mention the fact that with the problem of presidents putting in 2 or 3 at a time, we wouldn't have that. We would have a system where the term limits would be in a way where the first president to oversee that system could nominate a bunch of justices, but afterward they would be, shall I say, like implemented at different points. It wouldn't be exactly 15 years, but rather it would depend on time, if you get what I'm trying to say.
That system is mightily unsustainable. I'm going to say that as politely as possible. That's just not sustainable and just wouldn't work with the United States, especially with how fast we get Supreme Court cases put in. So in that system, it just wouldn't work out, which is why the system we have right now doesn't. The only keep this in mind. The only people that hate how the Supreme Court works are the people that don't have the lead in the Supreme Court at the same time, which is why back when the Democrats had more people in the Supreme Court, Republicans didn't like how the Supreme Court was. But now that there's more Republicans in the Supreme Court, now we're looking at a situation where the Democrats don't like how the Supreme Court works. So it's always based on who has the lead in the Supreme Court, and it's just not a sustainable system to change it all the time.
The other thing we have to do is we have to remember that the Supreme Court isn't the only part of the judicial system. There's also the circuit courts and the courts of appeal, all of which are also lifetime appointments.
Is
So
that
it
all
wouldn't
for
make
everyone?
a lot of sense to try and regulate a system that would also have all of those justices, of which there are hundreds, to regulate a system where they each sort of stagger in the years that they are on and off the court. And it would also bring politics heavily into the judicial system, which is not what the judicial branch was meant for.
Thank you. So now let's move on to the next question in the debate. The next question of this topic is, should Supreme Court justices put their own personal bias in while interpreting the Constitution? And I would like to ask Max up first.
Well, I thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, because very simply put, this is one area where I'm very, very ardent, and I say absolutely not. This is an issue of Supreme Court justices are supposed to be completely apolitical, and they're supposed to follow the Constitution, not their own beliefs. And we see this especially, I can pull out an example from recent history, which is Amy Coney Barrett, which a lot of people are concerned that she might overturn Roe v. Wade, or try to overturn it if it ever comes up in the Supreme Court, because she has written for pro-life organizations in the past. She's joined them in the past, and she has had a history of using her own personal beliefs in certain cases. Now, is that completely, she fully based it on her own beliefs? No, but it did influence it, and that is why I'm saying we need justices who can say, no, I will not let my own personal beliefs influence this. It is based solely on the text of our Constitution, of the law of this land. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. I would now like to ask Lucas to speak.
I agree with Max on this one that people's personal beliefs, especially in the matter of religion, should not affect how they would interpret the Constitution on the bench. However, a person's political beliefs would certainly impact how they read the Constitution. It also should, because different people are going to read the Constitution differently. For example, someone who believes that we should have gun control in this country is going to read the Second Amendment differently than someone who doesn't. And that's just how this country works. This country was designed in a way in which political parties were always going to be a problem. And that's something that we can't simply avoid.
Thank you, Lucas. I would now like to ask Noah to speak.
My view is actually pretty similar to Lucas's on this one, in the fact that while it shouldn't on a political way, different opinions are absolutely amazing in this country. Not in the divisive way, but different ideas are a great idea, because it allows for new perspectives to be brought forward and new interpretations to be brought forward. So personal beliefs is a bit of a broad description. So in the way of political politics wise, not necessarily, but of course, their personal beliefs on how they interpret the Constitution. Absolutely.
Thank you, Noah. Would any candidate like to respond to anything another candidate has said? And you'll have 60 seconds.
I would simply like to respond to both Noah and Lucas since they pretty much virtually agreed with each other on this. Yes, you're right, both, in that opinions should at least partially guide a person in how their political opinions, that is, in how they interpret the Constitution. But at the end of the day, the Constitution is a piece of paper with words written on it. And when you read those words, they should be interpreted rather literally as they were written. Now, I'm not saying they should be read word for word, as in, let's say, the way they were, because interpretations change over time. But I do mean that they should be interpreted in a manner that is lawful and not meant to subvert it in the favor of whoever is reading. And that is all I have.
Well, and here's the thing, though, is that you can't possibly interpret the Constitution for exactly how it's written because you have no idea what the founders were thinking of when they wrote the Constitution. I'll give you an example of this. When the founders wrote the Second Amendment in the Constitution, when they amended it, I should say, I don't know exactly what they were thinking, but I can probably guarantee you they weren't thinking about three guys in a Dodge Durango going and shooting up a restaurant or whatever. And that is a rather dark example, but we live in a world where that is a reality. And people need to interpret the Constitution how it best fits society today. That's more the point I'm trying to make.
All right. Thank you.
I also would like to say no two people are going to interpret the Constitution the same way.
Well, if I may simply, before we wrap this segment up, I would like to give an example. The Second Amendment, I'll just say this. The Second Amendment, I don't think was originally meant to even mention gun ownership, but rather a right to keep the armed forces up and running, considering a well-regulated militia being the right to keep and bear arms. Now, there's no being in there, but you can see what they intended. And you can also see that the army was supposed to be the legitimate reasoning of the people, the legitimate militia of the people. And you see where I'm coming from, because in those days, you had the Articles of Confederation before then, and no strong military, which meant people were very eager to go off and kill each other. But, that's not the point I'm trying to make. I'm simply trying to say that the Constitution should be interpreted in a manner that is not only orthodox to the text, but also interpreted in a manner that is good for present society.
Thank you, Max. So if I am correct, I believe that was the last question of the topic. And it was. So now let's move on to the next topic. And we'll be moving to energy. And the first question of this first question of this topic will be, what are your thoughts on using nuclear energy? And I know this is something you guys were talking about in the first topic, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about it now. And I would like to ask Lucas up first.
Nuclear energy is an option of renewable energy. Well, I shouldn't say renewable energy. It's an option of green energy that shouldn't be taken lightly in this country or anywhere in general for that option. Nuclear energy is, while effective in an immediate surrounding area, once you travel outside of, I don't have the exact figures in front of me, once you travel outside of a certain area, it becomes drastically less effective, which would cause people to have to build a large number of nuclear power plants across the entire country, which is something that the American people don't necessarily want. However, if we were to look at an energy source such as solar or wind, where we can build these wind farms in places where people don't live to begin with, and the energy can travel for across the entire country without losing all the energy that is gathered, which is a key factor that nuclear is missing. I think we can all agree that having these farms around where people don't live and being able to have the energy to travel across the country is something that makes both wind and solar far better than nuclear.
Thank you, Lucas. I'd like to ask Max to speak now.
Nuclear energy, my opinion on this is similar to Noah's, but not entirely. I believe that nuclear energy is a very good option for our country as a source of renewable energy. I think that, simply put, if we have large nuclear power plants in more of the rural areas of this country, we could supply enough power to power all of North America. And that would be very interesting, very economically lucrative, considering we could charge Canada and Mexico through the roof for it. But honestly, it could power this entire country, and we could do well with it. But the way that I see it, I'm more inclined to focus on other terms of renewable energy, such as windmills and solar, considering that those are relatively cheap to produce and relatively cheap to get energy from. Thank you.
All right, and finally, I'd like to ask Noah to speak.
Well, this is why I'm a moderate. I believe that we can do both at the same time. I don't think it's mutually exclusive. I don't think that we can do one but can't do the other. So I think that we absolutely can use nuclear, and nuclear does have a part in battling climate change, and having more clean energy. And that's why I also think that renewable energy has a big part. Both have a big part in this, and that's exactly how we're going to make this work. We cannot just completely shut out nuclear energy when it's so effective and efficient and cheap too at the same time. You got to remember how much people are willing to pay for their energy. And as I said before, France pays less than Germany does, and they use more nuclear energy. So it has a part. I'm not saying that it's exclusive. I'm saying that it has a part, and that's why we should definitely look at both as viable options for different places.
Thank you, Noah. So now I'd like to ask, would any candidate like to respond to anything another candidate has said so far? And you'll have 60 seconds to do so.
Yes, I would like to respond to both Noah and Max. I'll start with Max rather. You were talking about nuclear energy, and I just want to say that that's not how nuclear energy works. You can't build nuclear power plants in solely the rural parts of the country and expect it to power the entire country, as well as selling some to Canada and Mexico. That's just simply not how it works. Nuclear energy is unable to travel very far. So unless you built hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of nuclear power plants across the country, you wouldn't be able to power the entire country off of these. And on top of that, to also address Noah's point, they're more of an eyesore than a lot of other forms of energy are. And a lot of people also aren't comfortable living near a nuclear power plant just due to the fact of what they're making in the nuclear power plant, which is why I firmly believe that we need to forget about nuclear energy altogether and move towards a solar and wind system where we build these farms in the middle of nowhere where no one's going to have to see them at all.
We cannot just completely throw away a source that is so clean yet so efficient. That's That's just unreasonable. And I'm going to put it this way, right? That's why we use it in different places. In these rural and suburban places, we can definitely look at using more of the renewable energy sources that can travel far, because it's great to get it to those people. But in places like cities, remember remember that whole idea of those people being uncomfortable living near nuclear energy is simply just a misconception, because you got to remember that nuclear power plants are being made more safer each and every single year, with newer systems actually being put into place to make sure that these meltdowns don't happen. So as long as we can continue to put these sources into place, we can actually power cities greatly with nuclear energy, and even suburban areas. They may be an eyesore, but I don't believe that is too big of a problem. And if we look at solar, we got, I mean, not just solar, renewable energy, they take up such, especially wind farms, take up such a large amount of land.
But here's the thing, though, about that is that the cities don't have the land to build those. Yes, there are some cities that already have nuclear power in place with the buildings built around them already, but a lot of cities, such as New York, for example, doesn't have the land capability to do that. As you know, it's on an island and it's full of buildings and people. So why bother taking this extra time for an energy source that's not particularly effective across the entire country, that isn't efficient outside of the small radius, and that processes chemicals that we don't need to be processing in this country, when we can simply just move to a wind and solar place in the middle of nowhere where people aren't going to see them, and the land isn't a problem because the land is already there and isn't being used by anyone.
Well, let's just remember that New York is not the only city in the United States. I actually recently went down to Orlando, and Orlando actually does have a good amount of nuclear energy being used over there, and it actually works really well for Orlando to use nuclear energy. And Orlando's not a small city, so and remember that not all cities are islands. So many cities are built near water, yes, but you got to remember that so many cities are built inland, so there's plenty of opportunity to use nuclear power plants, as they don't take up that much space.
And you have to remember that New York City is also the largest city in America. And yes,
Not
well, it is one of the only ones that is. But what?
It's not the only one, though.
I'm aware of that.
Hello, I'd just like to say we should probably, before you go any further, I'd just like to ask, Max, would you like to respond to any other candidate? And secondly, we can use this during the debate time that you have at the end of the topic, if you'd like to speak more about this issue.
I respectfully refuse. I do not wish to respond to either candidate. Thank you very much.
All right. So you guys can continue this at the end of the topic, but for now, I think we should move on to our next topic question to save some time. Does that sound good?
Fair enough.
Sure.
All right. So our next question is, what are your thoughts or plans on making energy more affordable for the common person? And I would like to first ask Lucas up to speak.
Now, I'm largely in favor of solar and wind, which, yes, they do cost a lot of money to begin with, but the thing is that they eventually end up paying for themselves. My grandmother actually runs on solar, and while it did cost her a lot of money, she paid back all of that money in reduced oil and electricity costs in a matter of like a year and a half. And that's the other thing that we have to remember here, is that solar and wind energy don't only replace fossil fuels, they also help pay for electricity costs as well. So that's another thing that we could root out of your lives. So instead of paying an electric and a gas or oil bill every month, you can simply pay for solar energy once and have it pay for itself eventually, and pay for maintenance over time casually.
Okay. Thank you, Lucas. I would now like to ask Max up to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. As we're talking about. May I be refreshed on the question?
Yes, you may. The question is, question is, what are your thoughts or plans on making energy more affordable for the common person?
Absolutely. I believe that energy should be affordable for the common person. And actually, what Lucas just said was a very, very good point, which I believe I can actually tie into as well. And I think he's right in every respect here. I'll tie in my own familial personal experiences here. My grandmother owns a summer home in Italy, and this summer home has solar on the top of the roof. Now, did it cost some money to install? Absolutely. But it means that she gets her electricity completely through that solar. And the amount that she pays in electricity bills, pretty much nada, zero. Because that solar is pretty much so efficient, not to mention the fact that it can power an entire house after being charged by the sun all day for long periods of time afterwards. And with that said, I have nothing against nuclear power or nothing of the sort, but I think we should, if we're going to make energy more affordable, we should definitely focus on things that most people can get, like solar. And that concludes mine.
Thank you. I would now like to ask Noah to speak.
Renewable energy like solar does have a great place, and has a large part to play, as I said many times, with combating everything we've been talking about. But I would like to mention that solar energy is not a viable option for everyone, especially those that live in these huge buildings in cities. It would actually, even though I know that we can use solar farms, which take up a large amount of land, nuclear energy also does help bring down the cost. As I mentioned before, France versus Germany, they're focusing on two completely different sources, and France is using less, and France is paying less for the same amount of energy. So both have a part to play, and in near bigger cities, we can really help the cost of energy if we use nuclear. But then in suburban areas, suburban areas can be a mix of both nuclear and solar / wind farms. And then in these rural areas, we can really use these renewable energy sources very well and efficiently. And plus, what's to say that in cities, people can also use energy from wind farms. There's a whole lot of different options that we have, and nuclear really helps give us a whole wide range of things that we can use.
Thank you, Noah. And now that this doesn't conclude yet, because I would like to ask any candidate to respond to anything another candidate has said, if you would so choose.
I would. I just want to start. I just want to start off with saying, I completely get the ideas of not looking at nuclear energy, but I think it's a very bad idea to just throw it out, because it does have a part to play in the large scheme of things, and different areas would actually be great to use nuclear energy. So that's why I say we should use a mix of both, for depending on the area, and people can also decide what energy they want to use.
Thank you, Noah. Would any other candidate like to respond to anything another candidate has said?
Oh yeah, I'd like to respond to Noah. The reason that nuclear works so well in Europe is due to the smaller size of the countries. There are several states in the United States that are larger than the United Kingdom as a whole. So it's really impractical to try and say that nuclear power is viable when it doesn't work outside of a small radius. Like, yes, you can use it to power a city, but you really can't, though, because you'd have to build it close and in the center of the city so that it can power the entire city, which isn't going to work in places like New York or places like Miami, where there isn't that kind of land there to begin with to be able to build something like a nuclear reactor on it.
That's just incorrect. As I mentioned before, cities like Orlando use nuclear power, and they have one power plant that's actually near the outside of the city, and it is able to power a large portion of the city, perhaps even the entire city, which is why we can definitely look at that as an option for other cities.
All right, thank you. So now that we have finished all questions and responses for this topic, I will now give you 4 minutes to discuss. And
I'm pretty
that
sure we
starts.
covered most of our. I'm pretty sure we covered
Yeah.
most of our disagreements in the previous response sections.
So would you like to move on then?
I'm fine
Yeah.
with that. Yes.
All right.
Yes, I can do that as well.
Okay. Let's move on to the next topic then. Topic 4. All right. So let's move on to education, something that you guys will have to deal with sometime soon. And the first question is, should college be free for everyone? Or or should it be like discounted? And I would like to ask Noah to speak first.
No. College should not be free for everyone. That would definitely weaken the education system and definitely would do more harm than good and would actually result in less options for people to go to college and based on their abilities and how much money they have, how what their level of education would be. It's just not reasonable to do that. And certainly there are colleges like Gateway that have a large discount. I'm not entirely too sure what the figure is. It could also be free. That's something that I've also heard. But there's it's good to have options and being able to if you can afford it, go to better colleges. Though we shouldn't entirely focus on wealth status and definitely look to make better colleges more accessible, let's just say, to people that don't have that much money but still do really well in school. So there's work to be done, but college absolutely should not be free as a whole.
Thank you, Noah. I would now like to ask Max to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and let me get right into it. I believe absolutely college, at least public universities and colleges, should be completely tuition free for all students. Now, perhaps you may call this a weak point. Perhaps you may say that students should pay for their own schooling, but it is a basic fact that all people have the right to a very basic and decent education. It is the very reason that my great grandparents came to America in the year 1954. They wanted my grandfather, their son, to have the best education possible and to grow up in an economically prosperous country. Now, guaranteeing every person the right to go to college tuition free would ensure that they get the best of the best education without having to pay through the roof in debt that they can't repay instantly, not to mention with huge interest rates that are completely unreasonable. And I truly believe that it is necessary to make public colleges and universities tuition free. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. I would now like to ask Lucas to speak.
Simply no. College should not be free for everyone. But before we focus on college, we really need to focus on primary and secondary education in this country, which have fallen dramatically over the past 100 years. I just want to give some numbers. The government currently provides 8.5% of funding for K through 12 schools nationally, and education only takes up 3% of the federal budget. We need to make big changes in order to bring us to where we should be on the education front. We need to start by offering pre-K to every child in America for free. We need to eliminate the use of school vouchers and put that money back into public schools so they can improve and build upon what they already have. And we need to eliminate teacher tenure and remove bad teachers from the system, and then retrain teachers who aren't trained in the subjects that they teach in so that we can teach our kids better. But most importantly, on the front of college, we need to make college tuition tax deductible in this country so that while having it not be entirely free, it's just a little bit easier for parents to send their kids to college.
Thank you. Okay. So now we're gonna do something. I feel like we're gonna do something a little bit different. We're not going to have you all respond to each other for 60 seconds. We're instead going to leave this to the 4 minute what's it called? The 4 minute open discussion at the end for any quarrels you may have. So that's going to be from now on. So let's move on to the next question in that topic. And the second question is, what are your thoughts and/or plans on the major student debt most people in our country face? And by plans, I mean plans to help alleviate or resolve that student debt, or if it should be resolved at all. And I would like to ask, let me just pull up the order. I would like to ask Max up first to talk about that.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I think Bernie Sanders said it best when he said, no student should ever go to a college or university and rack up an enormous amount of debt. And he is absolutely right. No student should ever get huge amounts of debt from college or university. And under the Warner and Salyadar plan, this is what we would do. We would cancel every last cent of student debt that was taken out by any student whose family made less than $400,000. And, I believe that this plan would be absolutely great for all students who make less than 400,000, considering they come from standard, average American families. Those who have the higher amounts of money can pay for it, certainly, but we need to ensure that the average American can go to school without being crushed by debt, and those who are being crushed by debt are relieved as necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. I would now like to ask Lucas to speak.
There is roughly $1.7 trillion worth of student debt in this country, and a lot of that would be eliminated in the future by making college tuition tax deductible. And we could even, I would imagine, make current student debt tax deductible so that students would be taken out of this huge financial burden and be able to successfully financially support themselves prior to when they're in their late 20s or early 30s, when they eventually manage to pay off the student debt. And so I believe that's really the system that we need to take in order to reduce student debt in this country, instead of making college free, which would simply just bankrupt universities around the country.
Thank you. So now I'd like to ask Noah to speak.
Anisha and I have actually set forward a plan that is actually similar to what Lucas just mentioned. That a big part of helping the student debt in this country lies in taxes. The one thing that Anisha and I do differently is that we in our tax plan we set up a new bracket for people paying off college debt. Because this would allow them to help pay for their college debt while still getting more of their money. And setting up that bracket would really help them. But absolutely, there's lots of work to do, and I actually agree a lot with what Lucas presented. But I do want to ask Max, where would all that debt go in your plan to cancel all the debt? Where would all that money go? Because the debt is the fact that money is supposed to be there where it isn't. There's a negative amount of money. How are you going to just cancel that?
Now, see, here is the Warner plan. You see, those students who come from a family making $400,000 and less a year would have their, the amount that they currently owe to the federal student aid, to the Department of Education. Those loans would simply dissipate into thin air. We would literally cancel them, like they don't exist anymore. You see, if the Department of Education really wants that money, we'll give it to them. We'll literally just pay them. But if they don't resist, we will literally just tear up the papers and make the numbers go away and say, deal with the money that's already been given to you.
How are you going to pay them $1.7 trillion?
You see, no, that's where you're getting just a tad bit off because 1.7 trillion is the total. Now we're not canceling all of it. You see, we're only canceling that for students that have $400,000 less in their family. Now, would it be 1.3 trillion then? No, it would be a little bit less. I'd say around 600, 500 billion. Am I in the ballpark?
No. There aren't, contrary to what you might believe, there aren't a lot of families in this country that make over $400,000 a year to begin with. So there would realistically be somewhere more like $1 trillion in total of the debt. And I'm going to second Noah's question here and ask you, where are you going to find the $1 trillion to pay for that debt? Because the United States government simply can't just cancel independent loans from outside institutions. That's not how the government works. So I'm going to ask you how you plan on paying for that.
You see, we already pay through the roof for plenty of other institutions. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take out a blank check, write a large amount of number on it, and literally pay off all these institutions. We've done it before for World War II. We've done it before during the Cold War, and we can do it again. I guarantee you this.
But here's the thing, is when we did that during World War II, the blank check was issued on a promise that those countries paid the United States back once they're able to. So if you were to cancel all of that money and essentially just give it back to the colleges, how would you then enforce the colleges to pay it back once you make college free?
You see, if we, the government, pay for tuition, theoretically speaking, then we can essentially tax the institutions, those colleges, a good amount of, hey, we're helping them out after all. Why not?
So what you're saying is that you are going to, instead of having the colleges get the tuition, the government is going to then pay for tuition, which would take a large amount of money away from colleges. And then on top of that, you're going to tax colleges and institutions more, which would then even further bankrupt them past the point in which they could still be open, which would then have a substantial lack of colleges in this country for American children to go to.
We have
No,
about
you
2
see,
minutes left, by the way.
thank you, Mr. Moderator. What I'm saying is we're not going to completely bankrupt those institutions because we're also going to help them out. If they ever get to a point where they are really running low on funds to operate, we will give them loans, not the students, the institutions. And
So how
those
are you
will
going
have
to
to be
pay?
paid
That's
back.
not, you're not answering my question, though. My question is, how are you going to pay for this? There is still some financial discrepancy in here that the federal government is going to have to pay for that will likely surge into the hundreds of billions, if not upwards of $1 trillion. So can you just answer my question of how you're going to pay for this?
Very simply put, we pay for it with higher taxes. If students will not pay large loans, we will have to increase taxes. There, I'm completely honest. That's how it's going to work.
And how are you going to enforce a tax raise to pay for this, given that most people, the initial problem here is that families can't pay to send their kids to colleges in the first place. So why are you going to now tax them further to then just reinstitute the same financial burden onto them?
You see, we wouldn't tax them that high. We would take a good portion from billionaires, but we would also just very slightly raise taxes on the middle class in order to ensure that their children can go to these public colleges and universities tuition free. And remember, we're not forcing private colleges and universities to stop charging tuition. They are not going to go bankrupt. And they still can charge loans. They can still pretty much do what they did back in the 1970s and earlier.
So instead of having this large, elaborate plan that would end up costing the people more money in the long run, I believe that we should simply just make college tuition tax deductible, which would save a lot of people in this country the large portion of the financial burden from having their kids go to college, and it would be tax free in the end of the day.
And you should know Golden also second that plan.
Well,
I would like to say that your 4 minutes are up. If you, Max, I know you want to say something.
may I
but
please
say very
conclude? My conclusion is that the Warner and Saliadar campaign is very much thinking in the interests of the American people when we believe that all college should be a human right. That is, public colleges and universities.
So you
Public,
think that it's in the
public,
best
not
interest of
private.
the American people to raise taxes on the middle class?
Lucas,
Perhaps, but not by a lot. We're not going to do a huge chunk. Just a tiny bit.
Guys,
But I'd be curious to see how
guys,
much support.
guys.
Hold on, 1 second, 1 second. I would be curious to see how much support you're going to rally behind that idea on election day.
You know what? I'll be honest. Most people don't like that. They won't. They really won't. But at the end of the day, if you want your child to have a decent education, you will pay just a tad bit more in taxes. You already do it for public schools. Why not extend that?
Because you don't need to. You don't need to. You can make it tax deductible, which would save people money, and then put more pressure on the institutions themselves to manage their money in a more stable way, instead of passing on these massive debts to students and families that are going to college at their universities.
Guys, listen. I think that should be the cutoff. Okay,
Let
we've
us
gone
conclude.
a little too much overtime. We have to
Let
move
us
on to our next.
conclude.
Yes, I agree. We must move on to other topics to save time. Anyways, so our next topic is going to be immigration, and the first question that I would like to pose to all of you is: one, should the ability to immigrate and become an American citizen be easier? And I would like to first ask Lucas on that.
Absolutely not. The process by which people become American citizens is perfectly fine. What we need to do is we need to expedite the process. We need to put pressure on the institutions across this country that accept people into this country to do it at a much quicker rate. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I've seen stories of people that it's taken upwards of 20 years for them to get into this country once they've applied, and that's just terrible. It needs to take a maximum of 1 year from the day you apply to when you are accepted or declined as a United States citizen in this country.
Thank you. I would now like to ask Noah to speak.
Yes. I believe that it should be made easier and quicker. I agree with what Lucas said on making it about a year. But at the same time, when we look at the test that people have to take, so many Americans already that were born here and are even our age or older can't even pass the test. So let's just remember that for a second, and think about this. Maybe we don't change the fact that it's a test, or maybe we can make the questions on the test easier. It's that simple. And if we can do that, then we'll make the system a lot more fair, and it will actually cut down on illegal immigration, because so many people don't have to feel like they have all the weight of the world to just live out the American dream.
Thank you, Noah. I would finally like to ask Max to speak.
Of course. Now, in terms of immigration, actually, Noah and Lucas pretty much took the words out of my mouth, but I agree very much with both of their policies, and both of their policies comprise pretty much the bulk of my own policy. So I'm going to tell you where my policy starts to differ just a tad bit, is the topic of illegal immigration. And that is, we need to ensure that we eliminate the reason for illegal immigration, which is long wait times, which again ties back into what Noah and Lucas were saying. And I think the key proposal of my plan, of the Warner-Saludar plan, is that no person should be jailed for inordinate amounts of time for illegal immigration, and the asylum process should be made far, far easier than it currently is. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. For the next question I would like to pose is: should immigrants be allowed to run for president/vice president? And I'm going to ask Noah to speak first on this.
No, I don't think that first generation immigrants should be able to run for president. Should run for president. I think it should be citizen at birth sort of thing. And that does include people that, were born from American parents, but in a different country. So Max, of course, is able to run for president here, and Ted Cruz can also run for president. because they, and also I would also like to consider the fact that someone who was, you got to remember that Max over here, I know he's probably going to want to mention this, but he was only like, I believe he was 1 year old when he moved here. So he's basically spent his entire life here. So I don't see any reason why someone like him shouldn't be able to run for president of the United States. But someone who came here in their teens or in their 20s or older shouldn't be able to run for president because they haven't lived here their entire life.
Thank you. Now I would like to ask Lucas to speak on the topic.
Absolutely not. I probably completely agree with Noah here that immigrants who directly moved into this country and were not, in fact, born here, and obvious exceptions, like Noah said, made for people with American parents that were happened to be born in a different country, or on, say, like a United States military base, for example, or in the example of Max, who was born in a different country but born to American parents. But people who quickly just come into this country should not be allowed to run for president because they don't. A vast majority of them wouldn't have America's best interest in mind. They'd likely be running on the interest of the country in which they originated and came from.
Thank you. Max, I would assume that you agree with what they're saying, or would you like to put your own stuff?
All right. Well, based on, I'd say Noah and Lucas are pretty reasonable, but I believe that all U.S. citizens, that includes a natural born and naturalized, should be able to run for president. And I'll give you a good example here, a really good one. Alexander Hamilton was not actually born in the United States and did not arrive here until his teens. And yet, he was still able to serve in a high cabinet position. Now, he didn't run for president, but there was certainly a want for him to run for president. Now, he would not have been able to because he was not in America until his teenage years. But a guy like Hamilton is considered an American founding father. And therefore, this raises this whole question. The whole natural born citizen clause was intended to prevent foreign interference. But if you have a person who has spent enough time in America, cares about American affairs, we should very strongly consider allowing them to run for president.
Thank you, Max. And yes, before you say anything, Noah, I would like to say that this will be going into the topic discussion time. So let me just start that timer. You may go now.
Max, you brought up the example of a founding father, but so many of our founding fathers were, in fact, from Europe. Let's think about this. The first president to be born in America in all of American history was Martin Van Buren. All presidents before that lived in Europe. So let's just consider that for a second when we're talking about the founding fathers. It just doesn't apply to modern day society. It just it doesn't apply. People who want to be modern day president should be born in America and have lived here their entire lives.
Let's also point out the fact that Hamilton shot 2 people.
You know what? Yes, you're right. But I'll admit this. If you are a U.S. citizen and you have spent at least, I'd say, a good 20 out of, let's say the minimum requirement to be president is 35 years old. If you have spent 25 years of your life in America, then you should be able to run for president at 35. So I would say we simply need to make sure that those who came here during childhood should also be able to run for president. For example, people who came to America at the age of 4 would be disqualified. We need to reconsider that because at the end of the day, they are Americans after all.
But here's the thing with that, though, is you can't really draw a line there because you got to ask, because then at that point it becomes arbitrary and the line can move anywhere. And Hamilton, you brought up Hamilton earlier, he's a bad example of that argument because his trip to the U.S. was paid for by the people in his country. after his country was destroyed. So he was sent. He's not like he decided to move to America one day. He was sent to America by his country to try and help repair Central America, which he inevitably ended up not being able to do. However, that was still the intention when he was sent there.
I also want to point this out. Someone who came here at the age of 4 to 2 foreign parents will still be raised in a household where their country was still of high importance in the vast majority of those families, because that is still a part of them. The reason why the clause of born to American parents is because they were Americans. That if you were born in Colombia, let's just say, your parents are from Colombia, and you came here at 4 years old with your Colombian parents, so you're going to be raised basically in a Colombian household, even though you're in America. You're being raised by a Colombian family. So it's absolutely not the same. That's the reason why that's the reason why that clause is there.
Well, I think I'm about to absolutely obliterate your entire career here, because believe it or not, only one of my parents is an American citizen. My mother, on the other hand, is not an American citizen. Not only that, my father did not grow up in America for the vast majority of his life and was an American citizen through birth in New York. But let's just conveniently ignore that even though I grew up in a household that was mainly very, shall I say, sort of foreign in many aspects, I grew up very American because I grew up in a small New England town with pretty much speaking the American English language and, American values. So, yeah, it's...
You still have an American parents. There's still American values by default in that household. That's what the difference is.
I also want to quickly touch on a couple things that we said during the first question. Keeping the citizenship test hard roots out terrorists in this country, because most terrorists aren't willing to take the effort that it would take to pass a hard citizenship test. And it also shows dedication to wanting to become an American, which is part of the American dream in the first place.
Hello. Yes. Your 4 minutes have been up like 5 seconds ago. And I'd say that I'd cut it off here.
Let's continue.
Yep. All right. So now our final topic is economics. Ooh, we're getting into something pretty spicy here.
That doesn't check out.
We did taxes yesterday.
Oh wait, you're right. You're right. It's the wrong thing. I'm sorry.
Foreign policy, I believe you were.
Yep, foreign policy. I am very sorry. I clicked the wrong thing. I have multiple tabs open. I was expecting a vice presidential debate, but it turned out to be this. So,
we're all in that same boat.
Yeah. So, foreign policy. Our final topic is foreign policy, and our first question is, what are your thoughts on staying in the United Nations? And I would first like to ask Noah to speak.
The UN does get a lot of flack because they have failed on many occasions. But we also got to remember that there are occasions where the UN does work, and it does at least give us some sort of platform to communicate with other countries and work with them in a way that we have not seen before. And while it may not entirely work, that isn't because the idea doesn't work, but it's the UN and the way that it's set up that doesn't entirely work out. And the vast majority of the things that don't work out in the UN are from the Security Council. Max, you're going to want to fix that. The Security Council has had most of the failures, but a lot of the other that only makes up a small portion of the UN. And so we need to look at the entire UN as a whole and understand that it has been effective a lot of the time. So, I don't see any reason to leave the UN.
Thank you, Noah. I would now like to ask for Lucas to speak next.
I agree with Noah here. The UN is a necessary evil that we will always need in this global economy that we live in. And I say evil, I don't mean that they're like a terrible organization or anything, but I mean, like Noah said, they've had some very public failures recently, and a lot of it is on the security front, which leaves a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths about the UN, which is completely understandable. However, the UN is something that we still need. We can't simply disregard the United Nations because they had some mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. Our own investigative organizations like the FBI and the CIA make mistakes all the time, yet we don't abolish those. So the UN is something that we need in order to establish relations with every country in the world simultaneously. And a lot of the reason that the UN hasn't really worked as well as it could have is because people have agendas. And every different country is going to have a different agenda from every other country in the world. That's just how the world works. And the UN isn't set up in a way in which it can handle that right now. So we could try and bring change to the UN instead of trying to maybe leave it as a whole.
Thank you. I would now like to ask Max to speak.
Of course. Well, I believe that the United Nations is very important. Although it doesn't have much power, it was founded by America. Its headquarters is in New York, and it was founded out of the allies of World War II. Not to mention my experience in the Model UN when, earlier in my lifetime means that I am very partial towards the United Nations, and I believe that we can continue to work with them. I think they don't have enough power as it is now. And if we really want to make them a true intergovernmental organization, we have to beef them up a little bit, if you get what I mean by that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Max. We're now going to move on to our next question of the topic. And our next question is, what are you going to do regarding trade deals between foreign countries? And now I'd like to ask Noah again to speak.
In regards to trade deals, the United States doesn't have much part in what other countries do with their own trade deals. The United States is solely responsible for our own trade deals first and foremost. So, of course, that's something that we need to think about. The United States, more so at this current moment in time, needs to instead of trying to dictate what other countries do with their trade, we need to, look at ourselves first. It's not quite our business.
Thank you. I would now like to ask Max to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And of course, trade deals are very important to the United States' foreign policy. We have to remember USMCA and NAFTA. Now, NAFTA was very, very unpopular, and when Donald Trump replaced it with the USMCA, that was very popular. In fact, believe it or not, even bipartisan, there were politicians on both sides that supported that. Trade deals should always be in American interests if they're going to affect what we do here back home. And honestly, we should work even further towards the bettering of even better trade deals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Max. And finally, I would like to ask Lucas to speak on this topic.
Trade deals are essential to a global economy, and while I agree with Noah that we need to focus on our own trade deals at home with countries like China and even Russia, to an example, or Japan, we need to also worry about the global economy, because the United States, agree with it or not, like it or not, the United States is the only superpower left in the world. And in being that, we need to regulate what certain other countries. A good example of this is we've blocked certain countries from trading weapons with China after what happened in Tiananmen is a good example of that. And we need to continue doing things like that to try and make the world as much of a safer place as we can in the global economy we live in, given that we are, for a vast majority of the world's leaders in most areas.
Thank you. So now you'll have your 4 minutes to openly wait. Let me just give me a second. Yep, this was the last question. of the topic. You'll have 4 minutes to openly debate about this topic, and then we'll be moving into closing statements. So, and time starts now.
I don't think any of us have quite that much to say.
Right?
I'd like to
That-
mention
not-
something.
not-
It's not necessarily responding to anyone else, but a large part of the foreign policy plan in a Greifswald-Koschwitz campaign is to broker a peace between Palestine and Israel, which is something that a lot of people have tried and failed to do. Both Israel and Palestine have tried, and other countries have stepped in and tried as well, and it hasn't worked so far. And we truly need to broker a peace between those two countries because they're, quite frankly, at a civil war with each other over who has sovereignty over certain areas and who doesn't. And we really need to sit down with these countries and come to an equitable arrangement between both of them that everyone can agree to in some fashion.
I actually wholeheartedly agree. I come from a Jewish background, and seeing that my people's homeland is kind of getting hurt with this constant bickering and even war is very painful to see. And so one thing that I do like that Trump has been doing, despite all the hatred he gets from other things, one thing that he's been really good at is, helping the situation with Palestine and Israel. And he's helped create lots of peace deals around the entire Middle East with Israel. And I think that we are very well in the process of getting that settled out. I think we can move on to closing statements.
All right, thank you. So, in order, I would like to ask Mr. Lucas Greifzu up to for his closing statement.
We are a country that has been divided for far too long. Instead of focusing on the issues that divide us, we need to bring this country together as a whole, not only with itself, but with the world as an entire community. As we were just talking about, we need to bring peace in the Middle East as well as improve relationships between ourselves with China and especially Russia, considering the Cold War mentality that is still there. We need to also improve education in this country so that we can give the American future back to the people who actually live in America instead of to these colleges and universities to decide how they would spend our families and children's money. And most importantly here, besides all of the policy that you will have heard tonight, of the policy that you heard yesterday and tomorrow in the vice presidential debates, I encourage everybody to vote on Election Day on Saturday. And I would ask that you vote for myself and my Vice President, Christian Koschwitz, as well as you watch the Vice President debate to further hear our policies explained. I also want to thank the moderator, as well as both Noah and Max, for joining me in the second presidential debate tonight.
Thank you, Lucas. We will now be moving over to Max for his closing statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Moderator, but seeing as my opening statement and closing statement from yesterday were very good, I would like to ask you for a special favor. May I sing the Star-Spangled Banner as my closing statement?
No.
I mean, I don't see why not.
Oh, no.
I don't see why
Very
not.
well.
Hold on. Can Lucas and I put a veto on this?
Oh.
This
Oh, that's
I
a
just want to say.
shame.
I just want to say one thing. This is a presidential debate. This is not America's Got Talent. If you want to audition your singing chops for the rest of the country here, I suggest that you send a recording to America's Got Talent and possibly try out for that competition. However, we should keep matters serious here because this is a presidential debate. Not to say that the national anthem is not serious. However, you are not a professional singer. I don't think the people at home necessarily want to hear your rendition of the national anthem of the United States.
Very well. Then, in lieu of that, I will simply say this. America, we can be better. We can do better. I know that some of the things I have said tonight you may not have agreed with. Some of it may have sounded outright dumb or stupid in your opinions, but I can guarantee you this. I have the best interests of the United States of America at heart. I love this country, I love its people, and I will fight for you. I guarantee you that. Thank you, and have a wonderful day. Thank you to Lucas, thank you to Noah, and thank you to the Mr. Moderator, Andreas E. Menegatos.
Thank you very much, Max. I would now like to ask Noah to speak for his closing statement.
Ladies and gentlemen, I love America. I love everything about this country, and I know that there is so many improvements that we can make, and there we have all the potential in the world to fulfill that. We can make a human first capitalism. Humanity first should be in the interest of everybody, and that is something that a Sycamore and Golden presidency would really put to the front, that would really put forward. The Supreme Court will not be stacked under a Golden and Sycamore presidency. Immigration will be in the best interest of everyone, and we as moderates will do our best job to balance everything out. We will deal with climate change as much as we humanly can, and we will make sure to work with other countries to help establish this. And we will also, in a Golden Sycamore presidency, be looking to newer energy sources while at the same time phasing it out over time to make sure that jobs are not lost at an extreme level and people still have the ability to work. And along with that, we will also establish a universal basic income to make sure that those who do lose their jobs, not just with energy, but in general with automation, we will make sure that with the universal basic income, people are still covered in the way that we plan them to be. The United States will, of course, be put first in every single thing we do. We are Americans at heart, and there is nothing that we cannot do, and the American dream is still very much alive, and we will continue to make it better for everyone. So thank you. And before I finish up my closing statements, I would like to thank the moderator, Andreas. I would like to thank Lucas Greifsue, and I would like to thank Max Warner, all for coming out here and having this very civilized debate. And as I said before, there is hope for this country, as divided as it may seem. There is all the potential in the world for that to be healed, and tonight is a great step in that direction. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and please make sure that you get out to vote on Saturday.
Thank you, Noah. And I would also like to say thank you to all of our candidates tonight for coming out here. And that's our second presidential debate.